Okay, I think that we are ready to begin. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 7th Asia-Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Forum. My name is Hermes, and I will be your technical facilitator today. You are at the special session titled Filling the Adaptation Gap. Japanese language simultaneous interpretation is available during this session. The feature has already been activated and is available now. To listen in Japanese, please click the interpretation button in the menu at the bottom of your screen and select Japanese. We will begin in just a moment here, but before we get started, we would like to let you know that this meeting will be recorded for documentation purposes. The chat box is also available in case you have any perspectives you'd like to share, or if you need to reach out to me for technical assistance. For those of you just joining us, welcome. You are at the special session titled Filling the Adaptation Gap. We are ready to get started, so I will now pass the floor to Osamu Mizuno, Principal Fellow at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies. Osamu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the special event of the 7th APAN Forum, Filling the Adaptation Gap. This event is co-organized by Ministry of the Environment Japan, Institute for Global Environmental Strategies, or IGES, and United Nations Environment Program. I'm Osamu Mizuno from IGES, and I'm going to moderate today's event. But before starting, please give me a few seconds to say something. Today marks the 10th anniversary of the Great East Japan earthquake that hit Japan on March 11th, 2011. So I would like to take a moment to pay my respects to all those who lost their lives or who lost loved ones on this day 10 years ago. My thoughts are also with the survivors whose homes and livelihoods were destroyed by the disaster. The affected area is still recovering, and we must do all we can to support these communities. Above all, we must work to make sure that we are prepared for such disasters in the future that could be exacerbated by the climate crisis. Thank you. So with this, let me start our program. Thank you once again for joining us today. This event is intended to share the latest scientific information on adaptation gaps and options and introduce a regional approach to fill such adaptation gaps. We have 4 presentations that are all full of latest scientific findings and insights to move forward. We hope you can find this event very valuable to think about the next steps on adaptation. So please enjoy our show. So first, I would like to invite Mr. Kazuaki Takahashi, Director of Climate Change Adaptation Office, Ministry of the Environment, Japan, for the opening remarks. So Takahashi-san, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm Takahashi Kazuaki from Ministry of Environment, Japan. First of all, as host of this event, I would like to express my sincere gratitude to all participants, organizers, and partners who have made the 7th APAN Forum very successful so far. We are also delighted to be co-hosting this side event with IGES and Unip. At this session, we have experts from Unip, GCA, and IPCC who will present the latest scientific findings on adaptation, followed by an introduction of AP-PLAT initiative, which was launched in 2019 to develop adaptive capacity across the region. Each of the scientific reports to be presented today should be regarded as extremely important achievements, serving as routine reference material for consultations on adaptation efforts. The latest edition of UNEP Adaptation Gap Report, published in January this year, is particularly noteworthy. The GCA is a global-scale initiative launched in 2018 led by the government of the Netherlands, and it is making a significant contribution to accelerating global efforts on adaptation. The state and trends in Adaptation Report published at the end of last year is one of the key products of GCA. We are aware that this report will be published annually and will evolve in a complementary report to UNEP Adaptation Gap Report. Needless to say, IPCC assessment reports have always been the most reliable source of information on climate change, as they summarize the latest scientific knowledge on the subject. We are very pleased to have an expert from IGES currently making valuable contributions as a chapter scientist to the Asia chapter of the upcoming AR6, who will update us on the latest status in the compilation of adaptation knowledge. As mentioned at the beginning, Ministry of the Environment Japan, together with relevant organizations in the Asia Pacific, launched AP-PLAT. This is an initiative based on 3 pillars: enhancing scientific knowledge, providing supporting tools, and capacity building. In relation to the capacity building program, more than 20 institutes from the Asia Pacific were invited to our workshop last week to discuss concrete ways to work together, addressing capacity building needs in the region. Today, we will have a report of that workshop at the end of this session. In order to accelerate concrete adaptation efforts in the region, different approaches need to be taken to develop the adaptive capacity of the actors involved. In doing so, it is very important to understand the science and evidence-based analysis of the specific priorities for the current adaptation efforts. This side event was organized with the intention of strengthening the link between the efforts to identify the adaptation gap and the capacity building efforts to fill the gap. It would be our greatest pleasure if this opportunity were to encourage the audience to learn more about the AP-PLAT capacity building program and to get involved in it. The theme of the 7th APAN Forum is Enabling Resilience for All, the critical decade to scale up action. We hope that this event will be the first step of the action to fill the adaptation gap in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Takashi-san, for your opening remarks and concise introduction of the objectives of this event. Next, I would like to invite the first presenter, Dr. Valerie Kapos. She's the head of the Climate Change and Biodiversity Program of the UNEP World Conservation Monitoring Center. And she will introduce the UNEP flagship report, Adaptation Gap Report 2020, that was just published this January. Val, over to you.
Hello, everyone.
Mic is mute.
Oh, it's still?
That's
Now.
fine.
Okay, good. One can never click enough buttons. Good morning, everyone. No, good evening, everyone. It's evening for you. It's morning for me. If I can share my screen, what I would like to do is to tell you about UNEP's Adaptation Gap Report, which was launched earlier this year. It's great to have this opportunity to present. This is the Adaptation Gap Report, as some of you may know, is the 5th in a series, and it focuses on trying to understand progress in adaptation, particularly this year on planning, finance, and implementation broadly at national level. This year, of course, because everything has been influenced by COVID, the report itself was influenced by COVID, and we spent some time thinking about the impacts of the pandemic on adaptation. But besides the pandemic, 2020 was an enormously eventful year climatically as well. It was one of the warmest years on record. Over 50 million people were directly affected by floods or droughts or storms. There were pest outbreaks and wildfires. So it makes it very clear to us how important it is for countries to make progress on adaptation. And this report aims to provide an update on that progress. So briefly, I wish we could put the pandemic behind us, but briefly putting the thoughts we had about COVID-19 and how it's affecting adaptation, just to get that in front of us for a moment. There's a lot of evidence that COVID is presenting, on the one hand, an enormous challenge for opportunity. It's diverting both attention and resources from concentrated effort on adaptation, both immediately and in the longer term. But on the other hand, it's an opportunity. The efforts and investments to rebuild economies can be directed to more climate resilient and indeed low emissions options. Unfortunately, there's little evidence so far that this is happening, but it's something that I think we can all work to try to ensure happens, and it does represent an opportunity for adaptation if we get it right. So moving to the results of the Adaptation Gap Report, and I emphasized that this was reviewing progress at national level, and that we broke that progress down in terms of planning, finance, and implementation. So all countries have to report on their adaptation progress in some way, and the Adaptation Gap Report was done by delving into those reports and other resources. So it's a synthesis of what's available. We do see an increasing level of adaptation planning at national level. 72% of countries have at least one national level instrument in place. Most developing countries are in the process of developing national adaptation plans, and 20 have completed them. And countries are also increasingly, and I think this is really significant progress, developing sectoral plans for adaptation. So we're seeing more and more recognition of the importance of climate change in different sectors of our societies and economies. And we're seeing increasing development of sectoral plans for adaptation, a bit less so for subnational level plans, but we also probably have a less accurate view of the existence of subnational level plans. However, not all adaptation plans are equal, and the team who worked on planning put a lot of effort into looking at the contents of the plans that they had access to and evaluating them in relation to a series of criteria. Plans are increasingly, more than half of them are quite comprehensive in the extent to which they address climate risks that have been identified. And they're also increasingly being developed with an inclusive approach, with the involvement of lots of stakeholders. There's some suggestion that we need to get better at addressing gender considerations in adaptation planning, but inclusiveness is doing quite well. Integration, both across sectors and parts of society and vertically within governments, is a bit variable. 2/3 of countries have horizontal coordination mechanisms, but only a quarter is it clear how adaptation at one scale or level connects to other levels. It's very hard to evaluate to understand how implementable many of these plans are. Quite a lot of them are very general at this stage, and it will be good to see progress going forwards as those plans develop more specific content for implementation. And something that is going to come up again and again, and I would say is one of the biggest parts of the adaptation gap, is we need very much to get better at monitoring and evaluation of progress on adaptation at all scales, and that including monitoring evaluation as part of adaptation planning. As submissions to the UNFCCC get better and that monitoring and evaluation gets better, we'll be able to have a bit more of a nuanced interpretation of global progress on adaptation planning. Finance, as many of you will know, has been a big feature of a big focus for the Adaptation Gap Report over the years. And we see that finance is growing, but it's not really yet growing enough. So annual adaptation costs in developing countries are estimated at 70 billion, and they're expected to double more or less by 2030, possibly much more than double, and much more than that again, double again by 2050. Adaptation costs are rising, adaptation finance is rising, but nothing like that fast. And the burden, and one of the reasons for focusing on developing countries, is that the burden relative to economic financial resources available is often much higher for developing countries. So multilateral and bilateral support is increasing, but it's still sitting at about 5% of total finance. And that's alarming. We heard earlier this year from the Adaptation Summit a lot of emphasis on increasing the proportion of climate finance that goes to adaptation, and the Adaptation Gap Report certainly supports the need for that. So the finance gap is, although there's been scaling up of finance and that's progress, the finance gap is not yet closing. That said, adaptation finance is evolving. Instruments are diversifying. There are more actors in that space. The private sector investment in adaptation is increasingly being leveraged through the GCF and other routes. There's growing more momentum more generally across the financial system because of the growing recognition of climate risks, and this idea of climate risk disclosure has produced a great deal more traction for then trying to address those climate risks through adaptation. So new tools are evolving. I'm not a finance expert myself, so if I talk about them too much, I'm going to make a fool of myself. But it is very encouraging to see the progress in diversification of financial instruments. As I say, the disclosure principles, the mainstreaming of risks into investment decisions, beginning to stimulate investment, but we still need to see additional scaling up of both public and private finance to narrow the gap. We looked at implementation of adaptation action largely through what's being funded by the major UNFC-based climate funds, so the GEF, the GCF, and the Adaptation Fund. So we did quite a large, and we also drew on a large systematic analysis of the literature. This tells us a lot about implementation, what's being done, who's doing what, spending what to do what. It tells us relatively less about the results of that. So we know quite a lot about how many projects are being implemented and how large they are. We know that they're particularly focusing on drought and rainfall variability and flooding, and that there's a lot of investment in adaptation in agriculture and water sectors. We also know that we're not doing very well at tracking private sector investment. We think it's low, and it shows up for us in tourism, agriculture, and incentives, and insurance. But here again, we know, and we have known for some time, that scaling up implementation is important. But even more than that, we need really to understand what that implementation of adaptation action is achieving. And we have very little evidence as yet on reductions in climate risk from adaptation action. Projects mostly report against outputs. So this comes back to my point about monitoring and evaluation. We need very much to be looking at how adaptation efforts reduce climate vulnerability or exposure, and the evidence on that is very patchy. We know quite a lot about numbers of beneficiaries. You can see the statistics on the screen, but only 3% of the projects that the information is available for have actually reached stages where they can even begin to say something about climate risk reduction. And so I think that's another really important point from the Adaptation Gap Report, that adaptation takes time, that implementation of anything from early warning systems to much more long-term adaptation effort really takes time, and it's therefore going to take a while before we understand how we're doing on the gap, or even understand all of the dimensions of the gap. But it's quite clear that we need to devote more attention to assessing the effects of adaptation and to pay attention to maladaptation. We'd all like to think it doesn't happen, but we all also know that it does. So one of the focus of this year's Adaptation Gap Report, and I should have said this right at the beginning, was that we had a focal session on nature-based solutions. And this was the thing that I personally was involved in much more. And the reasons for focusing on this were several, not least on what was 2020, which was supposed to be the super year for nature, which now seems to be 2021, where we're seeing the global alignment of a whole series of processes that are increasingly recognizing the links between the crises on climate change and on biodiversity loss, and the recognition that nature has a fundamental role to play in both mitigation and adaptation. And I would bet that most people in the room, the virtual room, when they hear nature-based solutions, think in terms of carbon, because that's what's received by far the most profile. But one of the reasons for including nature-based solutions in the Adaptation Gap Report was to highlight the role that nature-based solutions, actions to protect, sustainably manage, and restore natural and modified ecosystems to address a societal challenge like adaptation, the important role that they can play in adaptation. And we've seen this coming up through the works of the Intergovernmental Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, through the Climate Action Summit, the UN Environment Assembly, the upcoming COP26, UNFCCC COP26, where nature is a major theme. And we're in the first year of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. So this is a theme which is coming to the fore. We followed the same pattern in looking at progress on nature-based solutions that we had followed for the bulk of the report. So we looked at planning, finance and implementation, and we broke down what we looked at in relation, or we wanted to understand where nature-based solutions have been deployed, and they address four main types of climate-related hazards, and we grouped those as coastal hazards, hazards resulting from intense precipitation, hazards resulting from rising temperatures, and there's a big emphasis on nature-based solutions in urban environments for heat stress, and nature-based solutions that address drought. So in planning, we spent a lot of time looking at national planning instruments, and we know that well over half of countries include aspects of nature-based solutions in the adaptation components of their NDCs, those countries that have adaptation components. Most of those are least developed countries, and this is partly because nature-based solutions are low-cost options, and it's partly because societies in least developed countries are often incredibly dependent on ecosystem services, and they recognize that dependence and therefore the importance of making use of it in addressing climate change and adaptation. However, most of what's in those plans describes broad goals, and very few planning instruments, either in developing or developed countries, describe very specific roles for nature-based solutions. So that will be one of the things that comes next as adaptation planning advances and becomes more specific. Deploying NBS requires thinking at scales that planners often don't think at, in the sense that they often think either nationally or at very local scales. And to deploy NBS effectively, we really need to be thinking at system scale. So that also is going to represent a change in the way that adaptation planning goes forward. Nature-based finance for nature-based solutions is also growing. And we looked quite hard at what the major funds were spending. And it's very, very difficult to tease out the nature-based solutions components of investments. But about 13% of the deployed finance that we were able to look at covered projects that address nature-based solutions. But only a little bit of that is about actually implementing nature-based solutions. The steps for increasing NBS financing are much the same as for increasing financing overall, but there's an additional step, which is increasing awareness and technical understanding of what nature-based solutions can contribute, because they're essentially novel solutions for much of the finance audience. This is quite a busy slide, but it summarizes the results on nature-based implementation of nature-based solutions for adaptation. We are seeing increasing implementation since 2000. Most projects are taking place in the countryside, although urban nature-based solutions, particularly for coastal hazards and to address heat island impacts, are increasing. And actually, it's urban nature-based solutions that we see being spoken about most for developed countries. Nature-based solutions also deliver other social, environmental, and economic and governance-related benefits, which actually very much increases their value, and it's why we think we will see increasing deployment of nature-based solutions. And those benefits often accrue to vulnerable groups, including Indigenous people communities, local communities, and women. So it's really quite important to consider that when we're trying to balance adaptation solutions. And they require particular governance arrangements. So there's been an exponential increase in deployment of nature-based solutions for adaptation. And they are mostly deployed in relation to flooding and erosion-related hazards. As for adaptation implementation in general, we're a long way from being able to say very much about the overall adaptation impacts of that implementation of nature-based solutions. But if we apply good ecological principles, we are getting to the point where we can model and project a little bit more and have more confidence in the tolerances and effectiveness of nature-based solutions. So overall, there's robust evidence that progress has been made on adaptation worldwide, but we need more ambition. Climate adaptation is now front and center in most climate policy and action. And the Adaptation Summit earlier this year helped us make more progress to raising ambition in this respect. But progress is still quite variable. There are some early signs of deeper transformation, but they feel like very early signs. There's a real risk that adaptation costs will increase faster than adaptation finance, and so we'll actually see that gap growing. And monitoring and evaluation is absolutely fundamental to us being able to do better at both tracking progress and understanding effectiveness. And I think that's the point I would like to leave you with. Thank you.
Thank you, Belle, for your excellent summary of the Adaptation Gap Report, with a special focus on the nature-based solutions, as well as maybe highlighting the importance of monitoring and evaluation. It is good to know that we are moving ahead on adaptation at a global scale, but we are also reminded that there are many things to do to alleviate the impacts of this climate crisis. So I'd like to next invite Ms. Apin Chen, the Regional Director of the Global Center on Adaptation, or GCA, China office. She will introduce another critical report called State and Trends in Adaptation Report that was published last December, as well as the activities of the Global Center on Adaptation. So APAN, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to share my screen. I hope you can all see my screen now, no problem. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone from all over the world. My name is Ai-Ping Chen, the Regional Director of the Global Center on Adaptation Office in Beijing, responsible for supporting the adaptation actions in the region of Asia Pacific. It is my honor to be invited by the IGES to join the colleagues from UNEP, WCMC, and IPCC author, and as well as the Japanese government. It's a very nice special event. A bit about myself, I joined the GCA, the Global Center on Adaptation, in 2019. Prior to that, I had been working for 13 years for the UN Climate Change Secretariat, the UNFCCC. And I joined the GCA because I really see, compared to a lot of focus and the spotlight on climate mitigation, climate adaptation does need a lot more attention, and more people and more of us are dedicated to the work of climate adaptation. So without further ado, I'm going to start my presentation. I'm going to excuse myself by turning off my camera, because to make sure that the internet connection goes smoothly while I share my screen and presenting, because my internet's already telling me that my connection is unstable. So I excuse myself for that. Okay, now, so before I start talking about the state and trends in Adaptation Report, which is my main focus today, I would like to give all of you a very brief introduction on the Global Center on Adaptation. And all of you may know the UNEP and the IPCC guidelines, but you might be wondering, who is the Global Center on Adaptation, the new player coming into the game? Then I would like to revisit the Global Climate Adaptation Summit took place at the beginning of the year, January 25th, co-organized by the Netherlands government and the Global Center on Adaptation. So the Global Adaptation Summit, as Valerie also kindly mentioned earlier in her presentation, for the first time in history, brought together 32 world leaders, more than 50 ministers, and more than 300 speakers and 18,000 participants to put the spotlight on and only on climate adaptation, and uplifting global attention and awareness of the need to accelerate adaptation action. So it was first time in the history, and it really concentrated everybody's eyes on adaptation. The summit is just the beginning. The Netherlands is hoping to continue this global movement together also with all of you here today, supported by the Global Center on Adaptation, the Adaptation Action Agenda, which is to be published soon, will help us in drive adaptation action beyond the summit towards the UNFCCC COP26 and beyond within our cities, communities, and countries. So the Global Center on Adaptation, we put it on the screen, GCA, that's how we abbreviate it, is building on the momentum of the Adaptation Action Agenda and has been asked to support the community generated. With an evolving network of offices across Europe, China, South Asia, and Africa, it's working with different partners to grow the adaptation movement through programs and actions. Agenda setting, knowledge acceleration, as you see on the screen, the three pillars of the GCA's work, including the GCA's Adaptation Knowledge Exchange Platform launched also at the summit. So the GCA model is based on a global headquarter in Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and a knowledge and innovation hub in the city of Groningen of the Netherlands, and a network of regional offices. So we opened our first regional office in Beijing. It wasn't last year. As you can see, the slide was a bit outdated. It was in June 2019. That somehow COVID also make us forget about how fast time can pass. And then in September 2020, we launched the GCA South Asian and GCA Africa office. And more regional offices are expected to follow in the coming 2 years. In the middle of the pandemic, and everybody will talk about the COVID, it's unavoidable. GCA is making the case that investing in adaptation yields a triple dividend. It not only helps to reduce the pandemic risk, but also helps with countries' economic recovery and enhance the action to make the country more climate resilient. As how President Bongo of the Gabon, the Africa Union champion of the Africa Adaptation Initiative, of which the GCA is a managing partner, said, the real impact of the coronavirus crisis on climate will ultimately depend on the choices we make today in how we recover. Meeting the Paris Agreement's goals for mitigation and adaptation must be central to this effort to ensure we reduce the likelihood of future pandemics. And to accelerate adaptation actions, GCA has divided its work into 5 programs, as you can see on the screen: water for urban growth and resilience, nature for more resilient infrastructure, rural well-being and food security, climate finance, and building youth leadership for adaptation action. So other than the 5 work programs, GCA also identified 2 cross-cutting components, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide: locally led action and gender mainstreaming, because the real adaptation actions on the ground are those that originated from and will benefit the local communities. And they should be fair and benefit all people. The GCA has set up a very ambitious business plan. Some of the outcomes we want to reach from now until 2025, as you can see, are listed in the table on the slide, including, for example, supporting 5 billion euros of investment in Africa through the water project preparation facility, supporting the Coastal Resilience Research Consortium led by the African Development Bank, and roll out digital tools to reach at least 100 million farmers in Africa. Among the 3 pillars that I mentioned earlier in the earlier slides, I would like to focus on the GCA state and trend in adaptation report today. It is part of our work under the pillar of knowledge acceleration. Other than the state and trend report, this pillar of work also include an online knowledge exchange platform, and the various research tracks focus on different sectors and stakeholders, research in local level vulnerabilities and risks, and other elements. I will now highlight the state and trend report and the accompanying online knowledge exchange platform. So the first annual state and trends in adaptation report and the GCA's online knowledge exchange platform were launched in January at the Global Adaptation Summit. In 2021, GCA will launch the Africa State and Trends report in November at the UNFCCC COP26. So the State and Trend report is an annual product. And in 2021, we are going to zoom in to Africa region and aiming to publish the State and Trend Africa report at COP26. The biggest incentive for the 2 products for the report and for the knowledge exchange platform is the realization of significant knowledge gaps exist in climate adaptation, the need for scalable and replicable adaptation projects, the lack of systematic adaptation framework, and gaps in knowledge sharing. Here, I think we share similar observations with the initiators of the Asia-Pacific Adaptation Knowledge Platform, the AP-PLAT, that there is significant gap. The aim of the State and Trend Report and the Knowledge Exchange Platform is to boost the thinking of the international community around the way we analyze and understand climate risks and solutions, the way we plan and make policy and investment decisions, and how the financing flows for adaptation action can continue to increase and reach the most vulnerable. The State and Trends in Adaptation Report and the Knowledge Exchange Platform will not replicate existing efforts. However, will find its niche in observed gaps and bring in good practices in the field to get inspired for its future work as well as research. I try to summarize what the State and Trends Report does in a very simple and straightforward language as shown on the slide. The UNEP Adaptation Gap Report just presented by Valerie gives us a very clear picture on adaptation gaps reflected in and related to the intergovernmental and other global processes. The State and Trend Report, on the other hand, zooms more in on countries and on indicators of making progress with adaptation on the ground, which is then subsequently aggregated to national and international levels. Therefore, the two report series are and will always be complementary to each other. While climate change impacts continue to grow in magnitude and frequency, recent progress on adaptation has slowed as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. The policy recommendation section of the S&T State and Trends Report is aimed at strengthening adaptation understanding, planning, and finance. The report further looks at how countries and different geographical regions are responding to specific climate adaptation needs, the progress they are making, and the challenges they lie ahead. In every region, there are strategies, processes, and solutions that have the potential of being scaled up and replicated elsewhere, with important lessons for all. And let's zoom in. The East Asia and Pacific region, a region experiences 70% of the world's storms and more than 50% of the world's floods. Compared to other regions of the world, our region faces the most severe disaster displacements due to weather changes. So the East Asia and Pacific region is home to about 1/4 of the global population. A rapid economic development over the past 50 years, and we are all proud of it, and a large coastal population in low-lying areas mean that the region, which includes multiple small island developing states as well, is extremely vulnerable to various climate hazards, including flooding, cyclones, and rising seas. Moreover, soil productivity, water availability, including groundwater ecosystems, coastal and marine resources, and health in highly populated coastal areas are already impacted by climate change. This is an overview of the top 10 countries in the Asia-Pacific region based on absolute and relative physical exposure storms and impact on the GDP, as you see with Japan high up in the list and the Philippines at the second place. The number is pretty impressive. The State and Trends Report addresses and zoom in the different regions, and the adaptation needs are high in the region of Asia Pacific are highly diverse due to significant differences in climate impacts and development patterns within the region that includes some of the world's richest and biggest countries, as well as some of the poorest and smallest as the small island developing states. Some countries, for example, Australia, are world leaders in the sector, such as adapting to water stress, using techniques including reusing wastewater, making appliances more water efficient, and water trading, you name it. And China has been pushing forward its adaptation work on the ground, especially in the areas of agriculture, water resources, forests, and other ecosystems. And Japan and South Korea, the other good examples, have good adaptation governance frameworks and implementation structures, which have allowed them to build additional programs where there are additional opportunities, such as through COVID stimulus package, the adaptation actions of other countries, such as the small island developing states in the Pacific, however, could really benefit from strengthening with additional capacity and resources. And there have been significant efforts to better understand the impacts of climate change across the region and to identify adaptation measures, especially nature-based solutions and green-gray infrastructure, as Valerie also mentioned, the nature-based solutions. Among others, the report showcased the Indonesia's Smart Seeds project as instead of boring you with the massive text, I just put some nice pictures there that you can see on the left is showcasing the Indonesia's project, and with public and private sectors working in partnership to address climate risk. In the middle, as you see, is the China Sponge City initiative. And on the very right is Japan's interministerial approach to prevent disasters and support adaptive recovery. Very impressive policies. Then accompanying the State and Trends report is the GCA Knowledge Exchange platform. We invite everyone working on adaptation, interested in adaptation, to visit the platform and join the community discussion hosted on the platform. As you see, I'm just simply give you a screenshot of the platform for you to get a brief idea of how the platform looks like. And this slide shows all components of the knowledge exchange platform. Due to time limit, I will not dive into the details, but if you have any questions related to the State and Trend report and as well as the knowledge exchange platform, please do reach out to the Global Center on Adaptation. The locally led action. So looking ahead, the GCA has initiated 4 areas of collaborative work, including learning from practices by analyzing adaptation solutions and tracking progress on adaptation by non-state action, tracking progress on adaptation through national indicators across the 3 dimensions of understanding, planning, and finance. And finally, disaggregating risks and vulnerabilities at subnational scales. I think I'm going to, running out of my time probably, I'm going to stop at that. And I'm looking forward to further discussion in the event and outside the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Abin, for your excellent summary of the state and the trends in Adaptation Report, as well as the introduction of the Global Center on Adaptation. And thank you once again for your very punctuality of your presentation. It was very informative, and I also believe that your knowledge exchange platform must be a very handy tool for everybody gathered here at the APAN Forum. So next I would like to invite my colleague, Dr. Rajesh Dasgupta. He's a senior policy researcher at IGES, and he's also a chapter scientist of IPCC 6 assessment report. IPCC 6 assessment report is under development, and he has been working to contribute to this report with his colleagues. This presentation is prepared with Dr. Prabhakar, Dr. Kumar, Dr. Johnson, and Dr. Mitra of IGES, and to report the key findings so far collected for the Asian chapter of the IPCC AR6. So Raj, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mizuno-san, for your nice introduction, and also Takashi-san for your nice introduction. And good evening to all of you who are sitting across the screen. As Mizuno-san mentioned, that my name is Rajesh Dasgupta. I am a senior researcher at IGES, based in Hayama headquarters. So today I'll be speaking on key risks and adaptation options in Asia, as seen from not only IPCC but multiple global assessments of contemporary times. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge my esteemed colleagues who are also co-authors of multiple IPCC reports, Dr. Prabhakar, Dr. Kumar, Dr. Johnson, and Dr. Mitra. So next, please. Can I see the screen? Okay, thank you. Okay, so as Mizuno-san already mentioned, that IPCC 6 assessment report is underway, and we're expecting it somewhere next year, mid or end of next year. But as you know, that IPCC or any other bigger global assessments, so they build on scientific evidences, and scientists like us, we collect those evidences from literature, and for many of the other assessment like IPBS, we do the same process. So IGES researchers and fellows are working in different capacities in the IPCC 6 assessment report, including CLS, that stands for coordinating lead authors, chapter scientists, and contributing authors, particularly for the Asia chapter. But at the same time, we are also contributing as experts of number of relevant global assessment, including the past IPCC assessment, for example, AR5, and then IPBS regional assessment of Asia Pacific, and multiple other IPBS assessment. So all this gives us an opportunity to see Asia from multiple lenses of global assessment. And today I'll try to bring some of the key observations made so far and which are synchronous across all these assessments. So as you know, the AR5, Asia was defined as this region of 51 countries or territories. It was segregated in 6 regions. And as of now, we have more than 4.5 billion population, which is roughly 60% of the kind of total population. And there is significant evidence that, as we speak, that generally warming trends and increasing temperature are observed all across Asia, with particularly in the arid and semi-arid region. But more to this, the problem of Asia is possibly the multiplying factors, which are poverty and malnutrition, which makes these things more complex. So today I'll be talking about 3 major risks of Asia. So if you ask me how these 3, I don't have a very strong answer for that. But what we have is there are significant kind of agreement across multiple assessment that these 3 are the major risks of Asia. For example, first we start with the freshwater scarcity. Perhaps the greatest risk comes from the rising freshwater demand in Asia. And for example, we can say that with confidence that by 2050, the water demand will possibly increase by 30 to 40% as of 2010 baseline. And our reliable water sources, including big rivers, lakes, they are drying up. So which means that we will have some kind of water scarcity across regions. The second is possibly already discussed in the past two presentations, which is a rising risk of climate-induced disasters. And we know that extreme weather events are on the rise, almost all part of the Asia. And Asia's particular risks come because a significant proportion of the population are coastward. So the coastal population density is much higher in Asia. So that also gives us big risks. And lastly is the rising urban risks, because we are the only continent which is kind of urbanizing at a rapid pace. And issues like urban heat islands are prominent in all the bigger Asian cities. I'll be discussing all these three major risks in details later. Yeah. So to start with, let's talk about the freshwater scarcity. So as you know that we have more than like the climate drivers are expected to impact freshwater availability. In particular, there would be significant changes in precipitation, although we don't have much confidence behind this statement, but there are possibilities of changes. We have a possibility of, again, low confidence, but we have possibility of Asian monsoon alteration, decrease in river discharge, and of course, the rising extreme event in coastal areas. So these coupled with the non-climate human drivers, for example, land use changes, urbanization, withdrawal of groundwaters, they are going to give us a very complex situation where 300 million people will possibly live in water deficit region. So this is a key message from the 1.5 degree report. Then followed with this, that water scarcity is expected to be a major challenge for most of the region, particularly the West Asian region, where the semi-arid areas. Then there is also a medium confidence that the intensity of frequency of droughts will increase in some region, followed by the decreasing trend of river water, which I already mentioned. So now to summarize, what are the key adaptation options for the freshwater sector across multiple assessment, and I repeat because there's a significant effort has been put in the IP-based regional assessment to find out the non-climatic driver in the water sectors, particularly land use changes, etc. So to give you the main theme of adaptation in water sector, so first we can improve the capital intensive physical water infrastructure. I think this was already discussed in some of the sessions. For example, developing water saving technology, changing to drought resilient crops, irrigation management, control of evapotranspiration, and we have to have some innovative technologies for that, drip irrigation and building more water reservoirs. So that's one of the most high technical solution for this. And then again, we have some behavioral adaptation issues, for example, changing our water consumption behavior, not only at household level, but at the institutional level, like recycling. So the main issue is like we have to have some kind of reuse technology to be implemented, and that should be socially acceptable. And the biggest one is possibly discussed all through across the sessions, which is the nature-based solution, and it holds very strong potential for freshwater adaptation issues. For example, we have significant evidences in terms of scientific knowledge that land use planning, forest conservation, construction of wetlands, river water harvesting, rainwater harvesting. So these are something but we can readily use without much much capital investment. Only what we need to do is protect the nature or enhance the nature's ecosystem functions. Then the second, the most important part here is that we need to also prepare our disaster preparedness. So I'll be also talking this about this in the next couple of slides, but we need to have more inclusive early warning system for droughts, and also strengthening the local capacities of the local government, particularly in developing countries. And lastly, but not the least, is like we have to have the adaptive integrated water resource management, which is actually diversification of water resources, including water use. Along with that, we need to mainstream the indigenous local knowledge system for traditional resource-dependent communities. So we have multiple evidences, particularly from the West Asia, that indigenous communities, they have systems in place to deal with water scarcity in during the summer season. So we have to scale up those measures for adapting to this situation. So the next, I'll be briefly discussing about another big major risk, which is the climate-induced disasters. I'm fortunate that most of the presentation I was seeing that most of them talked about climate-induced disaster already. But what I want to particularly focus is that that we also, after we do all these climate adaptation options and mitigation options, because of the climate extremities, we'll have some events, extreme water events, extreme weather events, which will continue. And this will possibly gives us a lot of residual risk to deal with. So during, for example, during last decade, almost 15 years, so I think this already being mentioned, but still I repeat that the 7 of 10 top disaster affected countries belong to Asia. And Myanmar in particular, they lost around 8% of GDP, followed by Philippines. So that's one of the major issue we have to deal with in the future. And there is also a growing evidence for anthropogenic climate change behind the increase of frequency and intensity of extreme weather events. So still, for some particular disaster, we don't have that much confidence, but in general, we can say that the climate change is sort of intensifying the extreme weather events. So to give you, this is actually the 7 countries which I mentioned. My colleague, he painstakingly sort of summarize all scientific information from these 7 countries. And what we can see, I'll not, of course, take you to the details, but what we can see is generally a very strong increasing trend, almost all kind of risk profile. Although the risk profile, as you can see, is very diverse. It's not uniform across the countries, but what we can see that increase in flood events, the commonalities across these countries, that will have increase in flood events, will have increase in extreme rainfall events, and increase in droughts in these countries. So this is some common regional feature what we can see from the scientific assessment. So again, I say this because we work on scientific evidence basis, and these evidences are generally the peer-reviewed publications which comes in journals. But there are some regions in Asia, particularly Central Asia, we don't have much literature, so sometimes it's really difficult to conclude based on lack of evidences. Second, for example, this is what I summarize the key climate disaster risks and adaptation constraints. So again, one of my colleague, he studied a lot of literature on these and tried to concise it into a small table. So these are basically we have this 6 region and then how the extreme weather risks are increasing. For example, in East Asia, we have confidence of increases in coastal flooding, heat waves, and sea level rise. More or less, we can see that the coastal flooding is sort of highlighting out of this table. And this is because we have the largest coastal population. And as of the adaptive cap constraint, so you can see that we have, again, some cases, for example, the overall the information and policy constraint, they are abundant in Asia, but we have some kind of like constraint. For example, Eastern Asia and South Asia region reported diverse adaptation constraint. But again, I mentioned that we have scientific literature, so we say this, but many other regions, they don't have the scientific literature. So, okay, so overall, how we can prepare for this is basically developing a robust mechanism and capacity of institutions, building resilient infrastructures, strengthening historical databases, which is, I think, personally, I believe it is very important because you take decision based on data, and most of the countries, we lack historical data, so we should have some kind of very robust mechanism for collecting data. Then we have invest in technical capacity, ecosystem-based adaptations, and building social resilience are very important to this. Lastly, the urban risks, which I was mentioning. So urban risk is basically, as you know, that Asia is the region which achieved rapid economic growth because of urbanization in the recent decade. And this urbanization has cascading impact over biodiversity and land use changes. And still with this, South and Southwest Asia are still least urbanized among the whole world and still with a high urbanization potential. And the biggest problem we have in Asia with a high confidence, we can say, is the growing urban heat islands, which is sort of prominent all across Asia. So I think this, you know this slide because by 2050, the 14 out of 23 megacities will be located in this. I think this is a very common slide across this. And then what are the projected impacts? So for most of the climate change associated hazard in urban areas, risk level will increase, and there are some significant evidence for that. Heat wave will continue to rise, particularly in South and Southeast Asia. increase in urban flooding and possibilities of urban droughts and depleting groundwater resources. So these are the main adaptation options. So basically the better and resilience urban planning, what we need to do right now, then urban-rural integration for resilient growth, then ecosystem-based adaptation and nature-based solution is one of the potential areas, particularly through urban green space for cooling. And then we have scientific evidence-based adaptation measures from which would be like citizen size holds very prominent kind of potential in Asia. So I leave it with, because the time is running out, so I leave it with a concept which we are working right now, which actually brings the urban-rural areas as a whole unit, which we call the Regional Circular Ecological Sphere, or AR6 in short. So basically, this is a concept adopted by the Ministry of Environment of Japan in the Basic Environment Plan, and this in the fifth Basic Environment Plan. And IGES is actually currently playing a significant role to research and promote this concept across Japan and Asia. So basically, there are three components of this concept. Basically, what we have, the first component is to develop a low-carbon society, and then the second component is resource circulation among urban and rural areas, and then living in harmony with nature. So three very strong components. And we are trying to make self-resilient units or regions which have kind of complementing each other. So this concept we are trying to implement in Vietnam, Thailand, and many other places, and IGES is sort of leading this concept. So if you want to know about more this concept, please visit our website and you can find a lot of literature on this. So with this, I'd like to conclude this presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Raj, for your excellent presentation. It is good to know such region or sub-region specific characteristics of the climate risks. Also, your suggestions for the main adaptation options must give excellent insights for designing targeted adaptation actions. We hope you can make substantive contributions to the IPCC process with your colleagues and produce a very nice IPCC 6 assessment report. Now, we have watched 3 presentations on the latest scientific findings on adaptation gaps and options to fill such gaps. The last speaker of this special event will make a presentation from a different angle. Mr. Tetsuo Koyama, who represents the Coordination Office of the AP-PLAT Capacity Building Program, will introduce his program. That program is a collaborative initiative initiated by Ministry of Environment Japan to scale up capacity building efforts in this region through the partnership of key capacity building institutions working in this region. So, Koyama-san, over to you.
Thank you, Mizuno-san, for your introduction. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon for all participants. I'm Tetsuo Koyama, working for the AP-PLAT Capacity Program Coordination Office and Director of Bangkok Regional Center of the IGES. For my presentation, at first, I'd like to share my screen. First of all, I'm very happy to talk in this opportunity in the APAN Forum. Before my presentation, as Mizuno-san mentioned in his introduction, 3 speakers have already introduced their excellent scientific report on adaptation. AP-PLAT is also interested in the scientific knowledge, but we have more focus on the utilization of the scientific knowledge in the policy making process, as well as the implementing practical climate action. So today, I can talk about this scientific knowledge issue in the different aspect from the first 3 speakers. Before starting the AP-PLAT introduction, I would like to show you these pictures. Those photos taken by our partners in Philippines and me by Bangkok in Thailand. As you must know well, Asia-Pacific region is vulnerable to climate change and has climate disasters such as severe flooding or landslide in many countries. For example, I have to go back in the flooding days, and then I have to take off my shoes, and then I have to walk in the water like a river for more than 500 meters. This is a real life in the Asia countries. I think if we have more severe impact from the climate change, I think this impact has more severe and then negative impact to the economy and then the life in the Asia Pacific region. Considering this situation in the region, Japanese government established this AP-PLAT initiative together with Asian countries such as Thailand and Indonesia and other at the G20 ministerial meeting 2019 in Japan in order to support Asia Pacific region in the respect of the adaptation issues. AP-PLAT is to the platform for the climate risk informed decision making and practical adaptation action. This has a three pillars of the activities, namely scientific information and knowledge development, providing the adaptation tool, and then finally the capacity development. National Institute of the Environment Study and other partners organizations are involved in this initiative. IGES is working for the capacity development component as a coordination function. As I mentioned in my previous slide, the purpose of this AP-PLAT is to promote the utilizing scientific knowledge in policy-making process and practical adaptation action. For this, IGES intend to strengthen the capacity of the Asia-Pacific countries through the several activities. However, before starting the project, we have already conducted the preliminary survey on existing training program in the Asia-Pacific region. Based on the result of this survey, we found that many organizations have already conducted a different type of the training program, as well as developed a training module, even in the Asia-Pacific region. So we decided to investigate the training program at first by questionnaire survey for training provider as well as a recipient in order to clarify the gap among the both groups and challenge and issue at the first step. Up to now, 19 answers were received and plan to expand more group in the near future. Today, I'd like to show you the brief summary of the tentative result of this survey. At first, this figure shows the specific topics and sector that training provider did and training trainee took in their training program. As shown in your figure, water or disaster reduction and agriculture are common sector, but other sectors such as the gender issues are also popular now. Next is the figure summarizing the expectation from the capacity building, lesson learned from the program, and actions taken after the training based on the answer of the trainees. Among those figures, especially please look at the right figures, we found that the interesting fact on the actions taken after the training. Of course, most of the trainee share the knowledge or material they received from the training with a colleague. This is the number of the people did this action. However, there are quite few did a practical action such as implementing a program or support local government or community in the adaptation action. This is one issue we found for the future activity. So we asked both provider and recipient why less follow-up of the training. Left side is the question for the provider. Left side is the recipient, and then right side is the provider. According to the result, institutional or financial system for the follow-up or mentoring activity is not installed when training system is established. I believe that this is a common issue that we have to overcome in the near future. And finally, we ask common weakness of the capacity building and way to overcome them to the trainee and provider. We found that the diverse issues are identified, but information sharing, such as a good training practice and good tools, are common topics. And for this, we believe that the regional collaboration among the different organizations in the region is essential in order to solve the issue in the region. Considering these facts through our survey, we found the two common issues for the future activity. The first one is the different type of the training program has already exist in the Asia Pacific region for diverse targeted group and are implemented by the several organizations. Second one is to produce more effective impact. A platform is needed to enable these diverse training institutions to implement knowledge, tool sharing, mutual collaboration, and then follow-up support. This is our understanding for our survey. Then, under this condition, and also based on our result of the survey, we prepared the concept of the AP-PLAT capacity development program. At first, this program will be implemented as a network activity by the institution in the Asia Pacific region, which agree with the overall concept of AP-PLAT, as well as this vulnerability participation in this activity. This is the first concept. Second one is that the program is not only to provide opportunity for collaboration, but also enable enhanced implementation of scientific-based policy activities and on-the-ground adaptation project in the region. This is the second concept. The third one is the activity under the program are to be designed based on discussion among the partners. Then IGES for this will work for as coordination office to work closely with the partners. Then final one is the focus is to generate add value through the collaboration and partnership among the partners institutions for better adaptation in the Asia Pacific region. This is the 5 concepts we prepared in the beginning. Then under this concept, we tentatively prepared the 6 major activity plan shown in this slide. The first one is the networking of the capacity strengthening institutions. Second one is knowledge product development and sharing. The third one is the collaboration with the existing training program to implement the supporting activity for that kind of the training programs. The fourth one is the establishment of the new fund to facilitate the capacity building. The 5th one is launching the thematic capacity building course if available. 6th one is promoting the bottom-up capacity climate change adaptation action. This is a 6th major activity we are now planning. Then this is our tentative idea. In order to discuss with experts in the Asia Pacific region, mainly from the training institution, research institution, and also the regional and international organization to deal with the training program on adaptation in the Asia Pacific region. We invited these partners, and then about 40 experts from the diverse organization participate in this workshop. We exchange a view, and also the IGES provided our tentative idea to them, and then also kindly they provided their feedback and then constructive suggestion to improve our future activity. There are so many constructive comment and suggestion there, but mainly we summarize the 3 points. At first, the evaluation and monitoring of existing training program are essential to improve the regional system of the capacity development on the adaptation. Second one is the mutual collaboration and knowledge sharing among the regional organization can improve the effectiveness of the individual activity of each organization. The third one is the sustainable system, and the funding system for the program is a key for the long-term operation. Under this, considering this comment, I just promise to the participant to elaborate the concept based on the comment or suggestion from the participant in the workshop. Then consult with the key partners like funder or advisory board member for preparation of the basic document of this network, as well as finalizing the long-term activity of our future activity. This is all for my presentation. This initiative is just the kickoff stage. We will continue our effort for this activity and try to produce the tangible output from this activity. I hope that we can make a presentation on result or output in the next opportunity. And then finally, if participants today are interested in our initiative, your participation is highly appreciated. Finally, thank you for your attention today. This is all.
Thank you, Koyama-san, for introducing the AP-PLAT capacity building program. As you mentioned, I understand this is still in the very initial stage of operation, but I hope it will soon deliver tangible and impressive outcomes. And I hope those of you who joined today's event and have the same motives and passion can join this initiative to make it a major stream of adaptation efforts in this region. Now we come to close to the end of this program. But before closing, I want to hear the final words from the three speakers of today. First, I want to hear from Val and APIN on the two same questions. The first, how your report could feed in the design and implementation of the adaptation actions in Asia and the Pacific. Second, how such processes as developing your report could work together with the actions and initiatives in Asia-Pacific region to fill the adaptation gaps, particularly with AP-PLAT that Koyama-san has just introduced. So please give us your insights on these points. First, I want to hear from Val. So Val, over to you.
Okay, hello. I'm going to try to be quick. I think the role that the Adaptation Gap Report and other synthesis efforts can play is particularly in providing context for practical work that is being developed and for raising awareness among those who need to support that work. I think that, to answer a question I've seen in the chat, one of the major barriers to uptake for all kinds of adaptation solutions is awareness and understanding amongst those who are making decisions about policy and finance. So that's part of my answer to the second question, which is that I think that by providing some of these overviews and feeding that into capacity building, particularly with those making decisions on policy and finance, there's the potential for these efforts to provide direct support to on-the-ground action and further capacity development. I think I'll stop there in the interest of time. I'm happy to go into it further later.
Okay, thank you for your insights. Now, the next floor is APIN, and in your case, that maybe you skipped some of the key messages during your presentation. So if you wish, and you can just quickly touch upon them if you wish. Okay, please go ahead.
Thank you. So I think I would just, I think the time is pushing. I'll just go straight to your questions. I think the GCA's main role in the field is basically making it really a big case, adaptation a big case, and making a strong call to accelerate adaptation actions, and also to scalable and replicable in the practices in the region and to other countries and regions. So with the first report and on the global level published earlier this year, and towards the end of the year, one deep dive into Africa, and coming up there will be a deep dive report onto the Asia Pacific region. So I think that report, I would welcome everyone to keep a close look on that. I think that will certainly benefit a lot. I mean, we will benefit a lot from the experience of the Asia Pacific region, but the region will hopefully also benefit from the contribution of the GCA. Regarding the link of the GCA's data and trend report and the AP-PLAT, I'm really interested in what Koyama-san just mentioned about the focus of the AP-PLAT on the follow-up action of the adaptation policies and actions. This is really interesting point, and it's a very important niche. I see a lot of potentials and between the GCA knowledge products and the AP-PLAT, especially on how these two processes can be informed by and also benefit from each other. Of course, also with the UNEP Adaptation Gap Report, and how we can, inform by each other's work and contribute to each other, being complementary, and altogether join our effort to support with the common goal of supporting adaptation actions of countries and regions. I really hoped that with IGES, with UNEP, and with other partners in the room, I really hope if you're interested, I would be really interested to sit down after the conference to have deep dive into possible collaboration areas. That I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. That's all.
Thank you very much, Apin. It's very encouraging that I'm sure that Koyama-san was very impressed by your intervention. So it's time for Koyama-san. Over to you. After listening the interventions by the previous two speakers, what would you want to react, and please share your thoughts to move forward? So Koyama-san, go ahead.
Thank you, Mizuno-san. As I have already mentioned in my presentation, and Barry and Apin and Raji has already introduced a very excellent scientific report to the audience. AP-PLAT is also very interested in your knowledge, and then for the future, our training program, right? Those information all very useful. And then especially I found in the Barry's presentation, the gap report focusing on the adaptation finance issue. And then for the future activity of the AP-PLAT, we are also very interested in the to implement the bankable project support. Then, so I think, and we would like to investigate your report in advance together with our partners. In addition to that, so AP-PLAT is also planning to produce our tangible knowledge product based on our analysis of the training activities. This also very regional knowledge for the future activity. And then we'd like to sit together with the GCA, UNEP, and then to discuss with the future collaboration. Thank you again for your participation today.
Okay, thank you very much, Koyama-san, for your thoughts. Now it's time. It comes to the end of this program. As I said in the beginning, I hope you all find it very informative and interesting. Clearly, we need more actions on adaptation in this region. But such efforts could become effective only if they are guided by the sound scientific analysis on where we have the adaptation gaps and what kinds of options we have to address such gaps. The strong linkage between the efforts to identify the adaptation gaps and the capacity building efforts to fill the gaps is one of the keys for success. I hope this event could become a good case for such a trial. The links to UNEP Adaptation Gap Report and GCA State and Trends in Adaptation Report are available from the chat box here in the Zoom session, as well as the Forum Communities Program page. With regard to UNEP's Gap Report, summary in Japanese language is also available for Japanese audience. So please download and have a look at them. Thank you once again for joining this special event. We want to have a small questionnaire survey at the very end. So please take a few minutes and answer to this question. But before closing, just join me to give a big hands to all the presenters for their nice presentations from over your screen. So thank you very much. And we appreciate your kind cooperation on our questionnaire survey. And as Koyama-san said, if you are interested in AP-PLAT capacity building program, you can write down your contact details with your comments in question number 8 of this survey. We can follow up your inquiry soon. So with that, it's all over of this program. So thank you very much.
Thank you for
everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone, for attending today's session as part of the 7th Asia-Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Forum. Please take a few moments to fill out the survey for this session. I have also pasted the link into the chat, or you can use your phone to scan the QR code on the screen. Please do return to the conference community to find exhibitions and other networking opportunities, as well as the links for tomorrow's sessions, the final day of the 7th Asia-Pacific Climate Change Adaptation Forum. Continue the conversation on social media using the hashtag APAN2020, and have a wonderful day, everyone. Good night, good morning, good afternoon.